On February 22nd, 1872, Cleveland oil shipper W.H. Doane encountered a freight rate that had changed without warning. Moving a barrel of crude oil from the Pennsylvania fields to Cleveland had cost him 35 cents. The new charge was 65 cents, adding $24 to a carload. Doane did not yet know the full design behind the increase. A private corporation had negotiated a system of rebates with the Great Eastern Railroads. Under its signed contract, that corporation could also receive a payment when an outsider shipped oil. How could a company profit from a barrel it had never bought, refined, or sold? The answer lay in a few pages of freight terms, and in the name almost no one in the oil country had heard: the South Improvement Company. The American petroleum business was barely 12 years old. On August 27, 1859, Edwin Drake's well near Titusville struck oil at a depth of 69½ feet. Wells and wooden derricks soon crowded the valley of Oil Creek. Yet crude oil had little value until it reached a refinery, and refined kerosene had little value until it reached a distant market. Barrels therefore moved by wagon, local rail, trunk railroad, canal, and ship. Each transfer created cost and risk. Cleveland became a major refining center because it could receive crude by rail and send products toward the Atlantic or across the Great Lakes. That advantage depended on freight prices. A change of a few cents per barrel could erase a refiner's margin. Control of transportation did not merely support the oil trade. It could decide who remained in it. John D. Rockefeller understood freight as carefully as he understood refining. On January 10, 1870, he and his partners incorporated the Standard Oil Company in Ohio. Standard was already a leading Cleveland refiner, managed for scale, regular shipments, and close control of costs. The railroads had a different problem. The Pennsylvania, Erie, and New York Central systems competed fiercely for oil traffic and often cut rates to secure it. Large shippers could bargain for concessions that smaller firms could not see. By 1871, suspicion surrounded nearly every freight bill. Refiners believed a neighbor might be shipping more cheaply. Railroad managers wanted steady traffic at stable prices. Rockefeller wanted an end to what he regarded as destructive competition. Those interests did not require a criminal meeting in a dark room. They required a contract, a corporate shell, and secrecy. The corporate shell was the South Improvement Company, created under an unusually broad Pennsylvania charter. Its enabling act borrowed the powers of the Pennsylvania Company, whose statute had been approved on April 7, 1870. The oil venture was formally organized in Philadelphia on January 2, 1872. Secretary William G. Worden later testified that its capital consisted of 2,000 shares at $100 each, with 20% paid in. Peter H. Watson became president. Watson had railroad experience, oil interests, and business ties to Rockefeller. The stated answer to unstable markets was coordination. A draft agreement with producers went far beyond freight. It proposed a joint committee able to address production, the prices of crude and refined oil, and the size of rebates. The plan was not simply to carry petroleum more efficiently. It was to govern the trade. On January 18, 1872, Watson signed an agreement with the Pennsylvania Railroad. J. Edgar Thompson signed for the railroad. Parallel arrangements involved the Erie and New York Central systems and their connections. In return for special freight terms, the South Improvement Company promised large, regular volumes and facilities for storage and loading. It would also allocate eastbound oil traffic among the three systems. The Pennsylvania Railroad was assigned 45%. Erie and New York Central were assigned 27.5% each. For railroad managers, this was an answer to rate cutting. Each line received a known share. For the favored refiners, however, the agreement offered more than a volume discount. The rate schedule created one price visible to the market and another economic result for members of the company. The clearest example was crude oil moving from the producing region to New York. The contract set a gross charge of $2.56 per barrel. On oil shipped for the South Improvement Company, the railroad would allow a rebate of $1.06. The effective freight cost would therefore be $1.50. An outsider would pay the full gross rate. Then came the provision that made the scheme exceptional. On petroleum transported for other parties, the railroad promised the South Improvement Company a drawback equal to the member rebate. A competitor would pay $2.56, and $1.06 of that charge would be credited to the favored corporation. This was not a rumor added years later. It was the pricing formula recorded in the signed agreement. The contract also converted the railroad's paperwork into commercial intelligence. Daily duplicate manifests were to identify the shipper, origin, destination, kind and quantity of oil, consignee, freight rate, and total charge. Those records would go to the South Improvement Company's principal office. A favored group could therefore learn who its competitors served, how much they moved, and where the oil went. Another article required the Pennsylvania Railroad, as far as it legally might, to cooperate in protecting the company's business against competition. Gross rates could be raised or lowered when necessary to overcome a rival, while rebates and drawbacks changed with them. The document even contemplated a term of at least 5 years. The combination offered railroads orderly traffic. In return, it sought a price advantage, revenue from outsiders, and a map of those outsiders' trade. The arrangement could work only while outsiders knew little about it. During the second half of February, rumors reached the Pennsylvania oil region and freight charges began to rise. A rate from Oil City to Buffalo that had been 40 cents became 65 cents on February 19th. Doan's Cleveland rate changed 3 days later. On February 26th, oilmen read that the general increase had arrived while members of the South Improvement Company would receive favored treatment. The contract itself had not become a functioning commercial system, but the higher public charges made the threat immediate. Producers, brokers, refiners, drillers, and workers could see the same danger. If the favored company received both its own rebate and a drawback on outside shipments, resistance would become more expensive with every barrel. Secrecy had turned a freight agreement into a regional emergency. Within a day of the public announcement, roughly 3,000 people gathered at the Opera House in Titusville. The meeting joined interests that normally bargained against one another. Producers wanted a stronger price for crude. Refiners wanted cheaper crude and fair freight. In this case, they shared an opponent. They organized the Petroleum Producers Union and adopted an economic blockade. Members pledged not to sell oil to refiners associated with the South Improvement Company. They also proposed no new wells for 60 days, Sunday shutdowns, and support for railroads and refiners outside the combination. The press called the confrontation the Oil War. Its force came from coordinated refusal, not from a court order. The same oil region that the new corporation claimed it could organize had organized itself, and it demanded open transportation on equal terms. The union attacked the legal and political supports of the plan. One committee went to Harrisburg to seek repeal of the charter. Another asked Congress to investigate interference with interstate trade. The union also prepared a printed history naming the company, reproducing documents, and explaining the boycott. Independent refiners in New York joined the resistance and sent representatives to the oil region in March. This mattered because the railroad bargain depended on control of a very large share of petroleum traffic. The boycott showed that the South Improvement Company did not represent the whole trade, whatever its promoters had suggested. It could not promise orderly volume while producers withheld crude and important refiners remained outside. Publicity did what ordinary price competition could not. It made the railroads answer for a private agreement that had treated their transport network as the enforcement arm of a commercial combination. On March 18th, a committee from the oil trade met Pennsylvania Railroad leader Thomas A. Scott in Philadelphia. Scott said the railroads had wanted an evener to divide oil freight and end repeated rate cutting. The committee refused a replacement bargain for itself. It wanted no special terms for anyone. The decisive conference followed at the Erie offices in New York on March 25th. Railroad leaders agreed that oil transportation would proceed on a basis of equality, without rebates or drawbacks that created discrimination. Peter Watson and John D. Rockefeller came to the meeting but were not admitted to the negotiations. On March 28th, the railroads formally annulled their South Improvement Company contracts. The contract had promised a minimum life of 5 years. Organized resistance ended it in a little more than 2 months. The corporation failed, but the weeks around it changed Cleveland. While the secret agreement still appeared capable of taking effect, Standard Oil acquired roughly 20 of the city's 26 refining concerns. Surviving accounts differ on whether the final count was 2021 or 22. The central fact does not depend on the last number. Standard emerged with control of most Cleveland refining capacity. Former refiners later testified that the threatened railroad advantage shaped their decision to sell. Rockefeller offered cash or Standard stock and defended consolidation as a cure for excess capacity and destructive competition. Some sellers accepted stock and shared in the later growth. Others said there was no practical alternative. The South Improvement Company never realized its national design, yet the concentration assembled under its shadow remained. Pennsylvania repealed the South Improvement Company's charter on April 2, 1872. That same month, the United States House Committee on Commerce took testimony from participants and opponents. The corporation never shipped oil under the special contract, so there was no completed stream of drawback payments to trace. Its importance rests instead on intention documented before execution. The signed railroad agreement specified the rates, the rebates, the payments on other shippers' oil, the traffic division, and the daily manifests. This distinction matters. The case is not proof that every promised advantage was used. It is proof that powerful companies put those advantages into a binding plan. Public resistance stopped the operating system, but it did not erase the pages that described how the system was supposed to work. The opening freight bill looked like a routine increase, 30 cents added to a barrel moving toward Cleveland. The surviving contract reveals the other side of that number. One shipper's higher charge could have become another company's rebate and drawback. The South Improvement Company disappeared almost as quickly as it had surfaced, but its design remained visible because opponents printed the documents, legislatures preserved testimony, and later investigators reproduced the agreement. That record also sets a limit on the story. There was no conviction, and the special contract did not mature into an operating business. What survives is more precise than a legend about monopoly. It is a dated, signed plan showing how freight prices, private information, and railroad cooperation could be combined to govern a market. The scheme failed. The paper trail did not.